Oh, good evening. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Tarek. It's good to be back. It was one of those situations where your sponsor asks you to do something and you don't get to say no in certain situations. Ralph has been my sponsor for the last 6 years, and there's nobody on this planet I respect more than Ralph. There are several people that I respect just as much as Ralph, and I defer to Ralph. He's my mentor. One of the beautiful things about our relationship is that we can disagree and still respect each other. There was a while growing up in Alcoholics Anonymous where I thought everything your sponsor said had to be the gospel. I don't believe that to be the case anymore. But he is a guide. He is a guide for me, and he has what I want, and I spend time cultivating that relationship. A power greater than myself separated me from alcohol and a handful of other substances on the morning of November 5th in 2007. And because of a merciful God and a loving God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, a group of loving friends that care more about whether I live or die than hurting my sensitive feelings, I have found it unnecessary to take a drink or put a mind-altering substance in my body since November 5th in 2007. It's important for me when I give a talk, and I don't do this all the time. Tonight I've been tasked with a specific topic, which is emotional sobriety. And I don't like the word sobriety. I like the word sanity. I'm going to go with emotional sanity in step 6 and 7. But it's important for me to share with you where I'm at currently. My home group is the Over the Bridge group in Birmingham, Alabama. We meet at the Birmingham Recovery Center on Friday nights at 6:30. We are a discussion meeting, but you're required to bring the topic out of the 164. And then we also ask that if you don't have experience with the topic, that you just ask questions and not share at the meeting, but you're more than welcome to ask questions. I'm the secretary of that group. I currently went through the steps with a group of 6 guys. So there were 7 of us total. We wrapped up in November. In my 15th year, that was the 5th. In my 16th year, that was the 15th time I've been through the first 9 steps. It's not right. It's not wrong. I'm not here to tell you that's what you're supposed to do. I can simply tell you that's the path I ended up on, and I do it because I like the effect produced by it. It is a form of submission and surrender for me, and it's an acknowledgement to the people around me and to my God of my misunderstanding that I do not have all the answers. And there are always layers, deeper layers and dimensions of this power called God that I can express a desire to have an experience with. And the way I express that desire is resubmitting to the process. I know plenty of people that I respect greatly in this program that worked the steps one time and have stayed sober in 10, 11, and 12 after making their amends. So I'm not here to promote one way or the other. That's my experience. And then I'm currently, I'm taking a group of guys through the steps. I'm taking another individual one-on-one, and then I'm taking 2 other people through the steps. I don't share any of that as a form of setting myself apart as a distinct entity of some kind. The reason I share that is because I'm a 3 legacy sponsor guy. And our 3 legacies of recovery, service, and unity, they inform our experience with emotional sanity. They are going to inform the experience I have with my grosser handicaps or my limitations as a human being. We're going to call them defects of character for this talk. And so I had to paint a picture of what that currently looks like for me. So I participate. I had to participate in getting a drink and keeping that relationship active for many years. And I have to participate at a high level. This alcoholic does, to experience the awareness of a power greater than myself on somewhat of a consistent basis because I'm up against the ego. It's a constant fluctuation of when I'm aware of God and when all I've got on me is me. And all of the things I just described, I'm going to talk about tonight because it's my relationship with the three legacies that is going to dictate a great deal of my experience in emotional sanity. So I believe we experienced two miracles on this path. And the first miracle we experience is the miracle of separation. If we don't experience that miracle quickly, there's no recovery to talk about. And I'm very grateful for that miracle. The second miracle, it's an incremental miracle, is one way I'd like to describe it, because it's got different stations on it, because it's the returning of sanity. Now, when we work these 12 steps and we get placed into that position of neutrality in the 10th step, and the problem has been removed, and the illusion that we have a choice is no longer the problem, and we get taken to that place, that is the sanity returning around the desperate experiment of the first one. Because that was the crux of the problem for so long that I couldn't stay away from the first one, no matter how great or my necessity to stay away from the first one. I would attempt the desperate experiment over and over and over. And underlying all of that was this internal condition that was the breeding ground to convince my mind to try it again. So the returning of sanity around the first drink, that happened during my first pass through the steps. Sometimes I look back to my incarceration, and I believe the obsession was removed during my incarceration. I had conceded that my life had one shot. I'd been going to meetings for 3 years prior to being arrested. And there was a belief that whatever you people had in Alcoholics Anonymous was somehow going to fix me, believe it or not. And I made a decision that I was going to go find this guy who I didn't like very much, because he was a big book enthusiast. And in my 3 years of going to meetings, I did not care much for the big book enthusiasts. I thought they were too in your face. They didn't use the meetings like therapy, like I thought they were supposed to. And they didn't let me talk about my problems in the meetings, which really upset me. So I had to assassinate their character. And here I am incarcerated, and this one guy keeps coming to my mind. And so I go find this guy, and he takes me through the process. And that miracle happens somewhere in there. But then after all these years of being on this path, I'm going to, the more I think about those early years, the easier it is for me to acknowledge that very little changed about my character or my emotional. I was still emotionally insane in those early years, because I was willing to do whatever I had to do to not drink and use drugs. But I still chased skirt. That's what I did at the first year and a half. That was one of my primary goals going to meetings, because I was there to talk to girls. Not only was I there to carry the message, I was a fifth tradition guy. And what I discovered is when you have a message of depth and weight, and it's for some reason, I began to be able to use that, believe it or not, that depth and weight in my message. Women were attracted to it, and I used it. And I hurt people. And I created harm in sobriety, harm that I had to go clean up. I still cut corners. I was cutting corners at work. I remember having a job in early sobriety, and I would call my friend who was at work, because we still had we had to punch a time card back then. And I remember telling him to go ahead and punch me in, even though I was still a half hour away from work. And then I would leave work, and I'd say, hey, punch me out in an hour. This is in sobriety. And just to backtrack, I made a statement in the beginning, because we know we talk about emotional sobriety a lot. I want to use the terminology of emotional sanity, because for a guy like me, sobriety was always my problem. Just being sober was my problem those 3 years I was attempting sobriety. because I'm a man who has to have an effect produced in his life. I have to have an effect, otherwise I cannot sit still. So sobriety by itself does not work. And so I like to look at the sanity around my emotions and how that's evolved over these 15 years. Because in those early years, like I've just described, there wasn't much focus on character refinement as being the central point of the spiritual basis of life. I thought it was carrying the message. I really thought carrying the message and it was what everything was about. And I've been sponsoring guys since I was 4 months sober, and I've always had people to take through the steps. But the longer I stay here, the more understanding I have from my own experience that the entire thing here is about our character and how that's related to our spiritual condition. Because I'm a firm believer that people relapse for one reason: they're not in fit spiritual condition. But the spiritual condition, like anything else, has degrees to it. And my spiritual condition is informed by prayer, meditation, and self-examination. One of the most powerful things Bill Wilson wrote was in the 12 and 12, and it was about the combination of prayer, meditation, and self-examination, and how that creates a foundation for life that is unparalleled by anything else. But if I'm not practicing prayer, meditation, and some form of self-reflection or self-examination based on how I'm interacting with God's kids, I will have the inability to be in fit spiritual condition, in my experience, and I will not experience emotional sanity, and I will experience my defects of character in color in my life on a regular basis. And what that looks like is creating harm. And so I love the Bill's story because he specifically, when he's talking about the process that he and Ebby went through, and he references the step 6 and 7 in a way that he doesn't reference them anywhere else that I'm aware of. And it is my newfound friend is going to come and take them away, root and branch. And for the first time I got sober, or this past time, but the first time I went through the steps, I did my fifth step. I was given my instructions for returning home, and I was given a list of broad and general defects. I'm dishonest, I'm selfish, I'm self-seeking, I'm inconsiderate, envious, jealous. They were almost like the 7 sins to a degree in some stuff out of our 4th column. And I used to think that those were the roots when Bill talks about roots and branch. But because of some introspection and I've done and some work, a significant amount of inventory, I've discovered that I think based on how we are conditioned by our environment and our relationship with alcohol and the experiences that take place in our life, we are hardwired or programmed. And believe it or not, the programming is the roots. And typically the programming comes in the form of a self-defeating principle for me. And so I just went through the steps, and a friend of mine, he talks about, he's been here since 1985. So he's been here 38 years. And he says that the same defect of character that he showed up with in 1985 are still the same defect of character he has today. Back then, they were roaring lions that were clawing out the eyes of anybody who came around him. And so the shortcomings attached to those defects were considerable. Here he is 38 years later making a comment that they're the same, but he says, now my defects are like these little kittens that purr next to me, but they're still there. And the way I understood that was that the root is still there. And so I wanted to share some inventory with you guys because I think it allows me to use current experience and illustrate the point. I'm just trying, this is my interpretation. Again, this is just my experience. I mean, if yours is different, that's fine. This is about interpretation from taking a set of actions and having an experience with those actions. And so these are some roots to my branches that came up for me this past November. Here's one that really hurt when I heard it, because this was during the fifth steps that we did as a group. Is Tarek wants the accolades of being a parent without being willing to fulfill all the responsibilities of being a parent. So I want all the pats on the back, but I'm not willing to do the work. All right. Another one that shows up year after year after year is Tarek's way is the best way and should be the only way. Here's another one. My expectation of myself is so high and it runs downhill to people in my life and puts me in a collision course with them. My need to be right. My desire to peek down around the corner to see what's coming in order to make a decision that makes me think I'm safe. So I always got to be in control of what I think might happen before, instead of just taking a deep breath, making a decision, taking the action and wait and see what happens. I get this thing where I'm indecisive, and then I make decisions that are not practical. And here's the last one. I will eventually fail because I do not belong. I'm 15 years in and this stuff is showing up on my inventory. And so something happened after I went through this fifth step, because we're talking about the return of emotional sanity. I've been in a relationship for 3 years. I have this little boy now, and he needs a father. His father's not in the picture right now. And he was 4 years old when I came into his life, and I was jealous of him. He got all mom's attention. I felt like I wasn't getting enough attention. And the little children are so intuitive. They know when you're just talking and there's no real effort behind what you're saying to them. And so for months, I would wake up and my prayer and meditation space in my home was right outside of his bedroom. And so he would come out and see me praying or meditating or reading a book, and I would not stop. I'd look at him as if I'm instructing him to go back in his room. And he and I had a lot of problems in the first year and a half of our relationship. And there were times when he would wake up, and I know it's first thing in the morning, this kid's got to be hungry. Hey, you want me to make you some breakfast? Mom's still sleeping. And he'd say, no, I'm not hungry. And then literally he would go wake his mom up like 2 minutes later to say, I'm hungry. And I would start, I'm like, what is going on here? Why is this kid not allowing me to serve him breakfast? But I would go out into the world and people would pat me on the back because, hey, you're playing the role of a stepdad and you're being a financial provider. And I wanted those accolades, but I wasn't, this effort was not sincere. Our big book says, when we sincerely take such a position, all sorts of remarkable things will happen. That statement can be applied to so many different areas of my life. So I go through the steps and I start to talk about it. I disclose these intimate details of my life and what I'm struggling with other people. And this self-defeating principle has shown up 2 years in a row in my inventory. And so what I decided to do, so I wrote this inventory, I think in October. We did the hour returning home at the end of October. So this is my list of grosser handicaps. I was praying and meditating one morning, and the awareness of this exercise was in my consciousness, and he came out of his bedroom and I stopped. I stopped doing my morning practice, and I went to hang out with him. So this started to happen. It's almost as if he was in tune with me doing prayer and meditation and reading books, and he'd want to come hang out. So my morning practice became hanging out with God's kid, like this little boy who's looking for the attention. And I'm trying to practice spirituality and being and do the things I need to do to be in fit spiritual condition. And here I am ignoring a human being that needs my attention. And it's amazing how this little exercise led to an awareness that I think is connected to 6 and 7, to emotional sanity, and has transformed my relationship with this little boy. He's just the joy. Like when I travel for work every week, or I'm out of town on a weekend, spending weekends with you guys, and I'm coming home, I miss him and his mom the same. Like I can't wait to put my arms around both of them. And that's as a result of this process. And to me, that's the transition point of, areas where I don't like. My favorite definition of insanity is the lack of proportion and the inability to think straight. That's what was happening to me. My lack of proportion was, I thought this kid was out to get me. He's taking his time away from the relationship. He's in my way. I wish things were different. That's lack of proportion. And then I'm making decisions off stories I created in my mind that are not true. I'm unable to make decisions that make any practical sense. And so as a result, I was able to experience a transformation in that relationship. And now I get to this other grocery handicap, which is Tarek's way is the best and usually the only way. I consider myself to be a very organized and clean person. You guys can see my office. I mean, I'm very meticulous when it comes to putting things in order, because somehow I think I'm safer if things are in order, is what I've come down to. One of the things that really used to, with my former wife, if the dishwasher was not loaded in a specific way, I was going to create a shitstorm. This is like what Ralph and I talk about. Tarek, you got to know when a situation requires a fly swatter, but here's your problem. You bring a nuclear weapon to a situation that requires a fly swatter. And this has been my MO. And it was my MO for a little while in this relationship. And so Tarek's way is the best way and usually the only way. What I've noticed is as I've become aware, is I disclose these details to the men that I sponsor and the other men in my life that I have a transparent accountability with, not just I'm going to give this guy this, I'm going to give this guy this, and I'm going to hold this back from this guy. That doesn't work in my experience. So I've got to have that group of closed mouth friends that I am naked with. And so I share my struggles a lot of times with the men I sponsor, because it creates a space of trust. So as a sponsor, my number one objective with any relationship with a sponsee is to create a space where they trust me. I'm not going to be effective if my sponsees, the guys I sponsor, do not trust me. One of the ways I earn that trust is by disclosing all the egg on my face. And how many times I go to God in step 6 and 7 with egg all over my face, and I'm saying, God, do something with your boy, because these are things that I can't remedy. It's like having a defective product. They always have the notes that say, if it's defective, send it back to the manufacturer. And that's what happens with the 6 and 7, because we cannot fix these things. We cannot change ourselves. All we can do is go back to the manufacturer, the God of our understanding. And so I've got this limiting belief system that creates emotional insanity in my life, which is like Tarek's way is the best way. And so through the 10th step, which is so important if you're going to have emotional sanity in your life, at least for me it is, because I have to have something in me that's watching out for it, that's communicating with God, that's turning my awareness back to the present moment, that's turning my awareness to God, and that wants to stop fighting. And so I have to practice this. It's the hardest step to practice, but it influences emotional sanity. It dictates how much of a shit show our experience with step 6 and 7 is going to be. And so The dishwasher thing with my current girl, I mean, she's a princess. She's the most amazing woman I've ever been in a relationship with. But she's also the most unorganized woman I've ever been in a relationship with. And you're talking to Mr. Organization here. And it creates a burning and a friction. But what I've noticed is all those past experiences, all that hardwiring from the past, in combination with writing these inventories and disclosing the details, has given me a greater degree of awareness when I'm watching myself. And I can't tell you the number of times that I will look in that dishwasher and I'll just reload it myself. I will get home and the house is a mess sometimes, and I'll just clean up. But I'm not going to tell you there aren't times when I make a smart ass comment. I will. I have to do active 10 steps, but they're not as frequent as they were in my past relationship with my former wife, which was a constant thing that kept rearing its ugly head. I'm also very organized and meticulous when it comes to my profession. I'm in architectural restoration, and I'm working with designers and architects and construction companies. And in our line of work, if you're unorganized, it can cost you. And my supervisor is an unorganized individual. And I was having a lot of difficulty when I started the position a year ago. Now, I was talking to my sponsor about it, to men in my network. I was praying about it. It was causing me to have an experience with this defect of character, which is Tarek's way is the best way. And I heard an old timer say years ago, and it's something I've carried with me all these years, that the miracle attached to step 6 and 7 takes place in the actions of steps 8 and 9. So I have this defect that's showing up with passive aggressive comments, and a few times where I went over my supervisor's head to the vice president in our territory and made some comments, which put us on a collision course. Remember, my expectation of myself is so high and runs downhill and puts me in a collision course with others. And so I had to go make amends to him after we went through the steps. And I came into his office, we had our conversation, and our relationship has been entirely transformed because the conversation around the amends turned into like, so if there were a few things you could change about me, what would they be? And then we reciprocated the conversation. We had a dialogue about what we thought the other person could improve on and what each of us didn't like about what the other person was doing. And so now I don't ride an emotional roller coaster around this person who I spend a lot of time with because I work. You know, our big books is so deliberate. You know, the authors of the big book, they had access to every word in the English language when they wrote that book. And they picked the words that they picked and they put them in the order that they put them in. And it says a more important demonstration of our principles lies in our homes, occupations, and affairs. This is where we have to examine our principles and how we're living step 6 and 7. It starts at home and it's at work. The home group and the meetings and the affairs, that's after. The most important work I will ever do in this lifetime is between the walls of my home, not the AA clubhouse and not my home group. Within the walls of my home, because that's a reflection of my relationship with God. AA didn't get me sober. The big book didn't get me sober. My sponsors didn't get me sober. God got me sober. All of these things that I'm talking about and all of the places I go to participate, they just keep me in touch with the power that got me sober. And that relationship with God dictates my emotional sanity, in my opinion, and it dictates how loud 6 and 7 are going to be in my life. One of the ways that I have to look for evidence of growth, and one of the ways I look for evidence is around this idea that I have to be right. My 3 least favorite words to say used to be, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And when I learned from a sponsee not too long ago, and I discovered he was doing this with his children. And there was his stepchildren too. They would come to him and ask him a question about something in the past that he had no experience with, but he always had an opinion, and he told them exactly how it was going to be. So one day he got the intuitive thought to say, you know what? You don't know. I don't know. Let's find out together. And they would go look it up and have a conversation about it. And I don't know, when he told me that story, you know, when people say things and it lands so deeply that it's automatically becomes a part of who you are. It's fascinating. Some things just bounce right off of us. Other things, we hear them one time and they just become a part of us. And that has become a part of me. I do it with the Novin. You know, he's 7 years old now. And when he asks me something that I don't have an answer to, I want him to ask me something that I don't have an answer to, so I can say, hey, I don't know, let's go find out together, because it gives me an opportunity to spend time with him. That's the evidence that I have gained, not complete sanity in that area, because it still shows up. It shows up when I'm at my home group. It shows up when I'm doing big book workshops. It shows up that this thing where I think I have all the answers and I don't, but it's nothing compared to how it was 6 or 7 years ago. And 6 or 7 years from now, it's going to be much better than it is today. You know, that's the what I believe our program offers us is transformation. Transformation. So these ideas that I have about the connection between steps 10 and 11 and emotional sanity. You know, Phil and I visited briefly, and we were talking about topics, and I can't remember how this one came up. It's not one I get asked to do a lot. I always get 2 and 3. I get 4 and 5. I get 8 and 9, and I get 10 and 11. And so this is probably, in all these years, might be the 3rd or 4th time I've been given this as a topic. And this is the most important topic, in my opinion. I think the entire process is about the refinement of our character. Here's the interesting thing about our emotional insanity and our defects. They bring me to the present moment. If we are practicing a 10th step and we are truly watching, when the defect comes, like I start to see, this is Tarek, your time. Like sometimes I believe my time is more valuable than everyone else's time. And so when people are infringing on my time, I get defensive. It doesn't kick my ass like it used to, but through the 10th step and self-examination, the defect itself brought me to the present moment. And what happens if I'm practicing a 10th step? I ask God to remove it at once. Oh, now I've become aware of God. Right? And then I turn my thoughts back to God, to the present moment, because that's the only time God can be experienced as far as my, that's my understanding of it and interpretation of it. And so why I have to be grateful for these very things that we've been talking about for the past 33 minutes, these defects, because they sit me back down at the table with God, because I spent several years in Alcoholics Anonymous trying to change myself. And people that cared about me said it was really uncomfortable to watch Tarek constantly try to change himself and be hard on himself. And what's happened to me, especially these last 6 years working with Ralph, is I've learned how to be gentle. I've learned how I'm not the one doing all the changing. I'm the one doing all the seeking. I need to seek a deeper experience with God. Whatever changes is supposed to change. Some stuff isn't supposed to change, but the defects have somehow become a mercy and a grace for me, because they bring my awareness to the power of God. And there's this phrase in the back of our big book that's not talked about a lot. It says, most of us believe that the essence of a spiritual experience is simply the awareness of a power greater than ourselves. The awareness. If you're practicing consistent prayer and meditation, at least this has been my experience, as I continue to be consistent with prayer and meditation and self-examination, I experience more awareness of God when I become aware of my defects, because I have to turn to God for help. And to me, that's what this whole deal is about. It's about grow God, shrink Tarek. Grow God, shrink Tarek. And what shrinks Tarek more than anything is getting his ass kicked by character defects. It really does. I'm not a humble guy. I will never claim to be a humble guy. My experience with my defects and sometimes emotional insanity creates an experience of humility for me. And those are much needed experiences that I must have, because they've led to change. And I can't emphasize enough, because I've watched people to do this thing where they try to practice character qualities, practice the opposite of the defect. I don't have a lot of experience with it. To me, the defects are something that creates a struggle, and the struggle is sacred. And I keep going back to God because of my defects, because the alcoholism in remission, the addiction to these other substances has gone into remission. Can it come out of remission? Absolutely. But now I'm faced with all these things that are layers and layers and layers of things that are veils. They come down like a veil, and I have no awareness of a power greater than myself. All I'm aware of is my mind and the identification with different aspects of my life. I experience a struggle, like one of the ones I described from this inventory. And if I'm practicing a 10th step, the struggle itself has now led to an experience of my higher power, because I'm asking for help. I've become aware of God in the moment. I'm turning, because that's part of it. And I'm trying to stop fighting. I'm trying to resist the suffering attached to not accepting reality for what it is. Character defect or not, the reality, my suffering comes from not being able to accept the set of circumstances in front of me. And sometimes those are attached to defects. Sometimes I think if I act out in character defects, I'm always in self-will. Isn't it wild how every single time we are in self-will, if we go 2 years out into the future and we turn around and look into the past, what we identified as self-will 2 years ago is always, oh, that was supposed to happen just like that, because that's what God had planned. You know, it's like those last 6 weeks of my last 3. You know, if somebody looked at Tarek, he was a producer of confusion rather than harmony. He was constantly on a collision course with somebody or something, and he was trying to pull violently every ounce of life he could get out of it by doing things the way he wanted without considering the ripple effect at all. He is self-will one riot. You know, so 15 years later, that was God walking me over to my surrender. He was crushing my ego. He was reducing me to absolutely nothing so I could be delivered to you fine folks and carry the message be carried to me. How can it be God's will now and self-will back then? Same thing with defects today. Some of the most powerful spiritual experiences I've had have been around my embodiment of some limitation I've got, because it creates a surrender. And unfortunately, there was an old timer who told me that early on. He said, Tarek, most of these defects, you're experiencing a great deal of pain while they're being removed. That's been my experience. And there's none of these defects go anywhere as long as there's an illusion of value attached to them. Until the last flicker of conviction is snuffed out that the defect or the belief system is creating value, it's going to continue to show up in my life. It's not going to be objectionable, which is okay. It's okay because it keeps me seeking God. I'm still thirsty to this day. I'm just not thirsty for alcohol today. And defects and problems with my emotional sanity, they will keep me thirsty because I'll only have God as a solution to overcome my struggles with these things. Now, I'm not giving myself a green light to struggle in this way or anybody else, but that's the reality of what we got going on. It's a constant fluctuation. I wake up, I fall asleep. I wake up, I fall asleep. The only thing that's changed over 15 years is I spend more time awake before I fall asleep. And hopefully in 15 years, it's an even greater period of time that I am awake and aware of the power of God in my life. So I was tasked with talking about these steps. I remember years ago, I'd be terrified if somebody asked me to talk about 6 and 7, because all I had experience with was 10, 11, and 12 and making my amends. But 6 and 7, this is like the old cliche of it separates the men from the boys and the ladies from the girls. But if steps 10 and 11 are the juice in the program, and step 12 is the jewel of our program, step 6 and 7 are the fire in our program, because that path of character refinement is what this whole thing's about. The character development and refinement of that character, this is what leads to greater self-understanding. And there's a tradition that says he who knows himself knows his Lord. And they're talking about God. There's only been one copy of this version of God, Tarek. The essence, what anchors me in existence and animates my life is a force I call God, Spirit. There's never going to be another version of this copy here. Never. I have a contribution to make while I'm here. And I need to be aware of that, because I have a debt to pay God. And the way I live my life is an expression. So the greatest gift God has given me is my recovery. And what I do with my recovery is my gift to God. And there is one that's going to find me. It's going to find everybody on this call. And that one is death. And for that moment, when it's time for me to transition, the thing that's going to impact me the most is having cleaned up the wreckage of my past. So I am prepared for that moment. And that I have done all I can to live a decent life using the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so this topic of emotional sanity and step 6 and 7, it embodies the entire program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It truly is what everything is about today. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name's Tarek.